Still wait?
Yeah.
Okay. No. Just don't, I gotta keep that because people like it.
If you know you can get it.
I don't think you sure? Yeah.
There you go, if you want to say, yeah.
Just to be pleased to know this is Christine and I, this is our 38th. This is how we're celebrating.
It's wonderful.
All these years we've put up with me, it's been awesome.
Are you gonna take her out for a cookie yet?
Well, we'll do something. Yeah. Hey, how are you? 38 years. Now, okay, good evening to our live streaming audience and those who follow. Welcome to the 6th annual Hartford History Series, a program of the Hartford Heritage Project and the Old State House in historic Hartford. We're delighted to be here. And this is Trinity College's bicentennial. How much do you love that? 200 years of educational excellence, and we are delighted to have our friends from the Archives and Watkinson Library. Now, if you don't know about Watkinson Library, you'll hear about it. I've spent hundreds of hours doing research there. It is one of many treasure troves in this city for documenting lots of things, but also Hartford history. And our presenters will be Christina Bleyer, who is the college librarian. So there's not just Watkinson, the whole library system there that is fantastic. And then Eric Stoykovich, Trinity's archivist and manuscript librarian, and Eric Johnson-DeBaufre, who does the coolest thing, I think, which is rare books and special collections at Watkinson. Watkinson Library was founded in 1866. Originally at the Wadsworth Avenue, it's been at Trinity since the 1960s. So I think we're going to have a great presentation, and thank you for tuning in.
Can you hear me? This is good? Okay. So I'm Christina Bleyer. I'm the college librarian at Trinity, and I'm also the director of the Special Collections and Archives, which is the Watkinson Library. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all and to have the opportunity to speak with you about two, I should say maybe three of my great loves, the Watkinson Library, Trinity College, and Hartford. Before I begin, I want to thank Bill Hosley for inviting us and for all who have worked to make this event possible. In particular, Mariano Garcia and Jeffrey Partridge. Before I start as well, I want to give you a little bit of an overview, kind of tell you how this talk is going to go. As you can see, there are three of us that will be talking to you. And so I'm going to start off just by giving you a little bit of overview or a history of the Watkinson Library. Very, very brief. Those of you that are familiar with the history are going to say she left out so much. But if you want to know more, over there, you'll see some books. I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but there's some books over there. Those are free for the taking. So after the talk, I invite you to take one of those. It's the David Watkinson's library book. And they have all you want to know about the history of the Watkinson Library. And there's even a really nice map of Hartford in there. So please take one before you leave. So I'm going to start off, like I said, talking about Hartford or the Watkinson history. Then I'll turn it over to Eric Johnson-DeBaufre, who will introduce you to probably one of the most treasured items in our collection. And we brought that here for you as well to see, so you'll be able to come up, it's on the table over there, and after the talk, you can come up and look at it. And then he's going to pass the baton to our college archivist, Eric Stoykovich, and Eric Stoykovich will give you a glimpse of Hartford through some photos from the Trinity College Archives. And then he'll turn it back to me, and I'm going to talk about some of our current initiatives and possibilities for the future. So, this is what I just told you. This is our run of show. There we are. And I put together a little photo gallery for you that accompanies the brief history I'm going to give you. The Watkinson Library was founded, it didn't open until 1866, but it was founded in 1859 under the provisions of the will of David Watkinson. David Watkinson was an English-born Hartford merchant and a founding trustee of Trinity College. Watkinson wanted Hartford to have, quote, a library of reference, accessible at all reasonable hours and times to all citizens and other residents and visitors in the state of Connecticut, under such controls, rules, and regulations as will best secure the preservation of the books and comport with the general convenience, end quote. That's from his will. He specified that this library of reference, and so for those of you not familiar with the Watkinson or with special collections and archives in general, a library of reference means that the books don't circulate. They can't be checked out. They have to be used in the building. So he specified that this library of reference should be connected to the Connecticut Historical Society. The Connecticut Historical Society at the time was over 30 years old. To establish the library, Watkinson willed a sum of $100,000 to 9 trustees for the general endowment. Some of the money was devoted to the purchase and development of what became the Watkinson Library, which was supervised by a large board of trustees. Some of the members were George Brindley, who was a pioneer, a collector of Americana, and the preeminent educator, Henry Barnard. We have streets named after him here. We also have in the Watkinson the Barnard textbook collection, which is an amazing resource. James Hammond Trumbull was the first librarian of the Watkinson and was elected in January of 1863. He had established the Connecticut State Library. So this was the building, this was the exterior after they did, and I'm going to tell you about the addition for the Watkinson. This is about the election of Trumbull as the first librarian, and these are cards, invitation cards to the opening of the library. So it wasn't until Trumbull established Connecticut State Library, and he was then serving as Secretary of State for Connecticut. It wasn't not until after the Civil War had ended that the Watkinson opened for reference services on August 28th, 1866. Where it was situated in the Wadsworth Athenaeum. It began with 12,000 volumes on its shelves. Some of them arrived as gifts, but many were purchased directly by Trumbull. Trumbull was just a true polymath. He was an outstanding bibliographer of Americana. He was a leading scholar of American Indian languages. And he would transcribe in the indigenous languages from different archives. He would transcribe them and copy them, and we actually still have those in the Watkinson. He served from 1863 until his retirement in 1891. Mark Twain hailed Trumbull as, quote, probably the richest man in America in the matter of knowledge. And he really was responsible. He and then later he trained Frank Butler Gay to kind of follow his collection development methods. And they grew the collection over 70 years from 12,000 volumes to 130,000 volumes. In 1890, the Watkinson and the Wadsworth Athenaeum joined in an agreement, which led in November 1892 to the reopening of the Watkinson within that newly built annex that is still there today, and is where, here, might look familiar to some of you, that is where the Auerbach Art Library is now in the Wadsworth Athenaeum. So, I don't know if you can see it in this one, but if you go in the Auerbach Library, you can see the ornate carved railings, and that was done for Watkinson. So the Watkinson was there for 60 years, and then in the mid-20th century, they moved to Trinity. There was some financial pressures and a shift in the way that Wadsworth wanted to operate. And so first, the collections were housed in Trinity on the top floor of the library. That had just been built in 1952. In 1979, the Watkinson was moved to its current location, which is on the A level of the library. So the floors at the Trinity Library are A, 1, 2, 3, and B, so it starts actually, and C. C is the basement, nobody goes in there. Then in 1994, the Trinity College Archives was incorporated fully into the Watkinson Library. It's really interesting in the college archives, when Trinity was first building its library, there's a note that says, well, we want to build a library in the style of the Watkinson Library. So the Watkinson holds a collection of rare books that Trinity had built, and then this vast collection that these, well, now well over 130,000 volumes that Watkinson and Gay had built. So that's my super brief history. I'm going to turn it over now to Eric Johnson-DeBaufre, who's going to talk to you about, well, I think one of our favorite items in the collection.
So I need to raise this up.
Let's see. How's this going to work better? Here we go. Okay. So as Bill graciously introduced us all, I am just reminding you, my name's Eric Johnson-DeBaufre. I'm the Rare Books and Special Collections Librarian at Watkinson. And as the Rare Books and Special Collections Librarian, I'm often asked the difficult question, what is your favorite item in the collection? And this is a little like being asked to name your favorite album, or if you have them, your favorite child. And it's made harder by the fact that we have many amazing materials in our collection. But today, I'm going to go out on a limb and share with you my very favorite piece in our collection, and with your help, reconstruct the solution to a mystery about how and when it arrived in Hartford's Watkinson Library. This is not, I should say, an item like the Gutenberg Bible that most people have heard of and that costs millions of dollars when it comes up at auction. Its value lies elsewhere. And I named this my favorite item in our collection because whenever I have the chance to exhibit it, I cannot help but feel deeply moved every time I bring it out. To feel, in fact, like I'm in the presence of something sacred. And here it is. As you can see, the title of this document is The Freedman's Torchlight. No. Point. It's a newspaper that was first published in Brooklyn, New York in December of 1866. And there are some handouts that are going around so that you can get a better view of it. Its layout is like that of other 19th century newspapers of the time. It has a large masthead here, the Freedman's Torchlight, with a motto underneath, and volume and issue numbers just below that at left and right, with the publication place and date in the center, and the text of the newspaper printed in a number of narrow columns, in this case 4. All of these are very conventional for newspapers of the time. But this issue of Friedman's Torchlight graphically announces that it is anything but just another newspaper. Does anyone notice anything significant about the first page? Something that might indicate who its intended audience is? Anything odd? Go ahead. There's an alphabet there. Okay. Any guesses as to which people learning to read? Does the title? Free Blacks, right. Friedman's Torchlight. As you've guessed, this was published just shortly after the Civil War. The war had just ended officially in August 20th of 1866. A lot of people kind of forget that Texas carried on until 1866, but that's the official end of the war. So this was published just shortly after the end of the war in order to teach newly freed Black men, women, and children how to read and to provide them with some necessary basic education. So you can see why this has a sense of sacredness to it for me. It states this quite clearly on its second page, where beneath a list of its editors and contributors, it says that it is, quote, devoted to the temporal, that is the physical and material well-being, and spiritual interests of the freedmen, and adapted to their present need of instruction in regard to simple truths and principles relating to their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. If you're familiar with the history of the US Civil War, you might not think this is particularly remarkable, since the US government established a Freedmen's Bureau in March of 1865 to address some of the very concerns and needs just mentioned. But among the things that makes this paper so remarkable, so notable, is that it was not supported by the government. It was instead the work of an organization, the African Civilization Society, staffed entirely by people of African descent, many of them among the formerly enslaved, who had settled in a section of Brooklyn known as Weeksville. Nope. How's this working? There we go. Sorry about that. Weeksville is named for James Weeks, a free Black American dock worker from Virginia, who in 1838 purchased 2 lots in what is now the Crown Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn. It was a lot of farmland at that point and had been in the hands of white folks who engaged in a lot of land speculation and started selling off land as speculation. It was purchased by another African-American man named Thompson, and from Thompson, Weeks bought 2 lots. The area quickly grew into an enclave for free Blacks and for those who had recently escaped slavery. And by the 1850s, its population numbered more than 500 people. Land ownership was very high among the free Black residents of Weeksville. More than 1/3 of people owned homes. This was amazing at this time in the United States. And the neighborhood boasted several churches, a school, a variety of Black-owned businesses, its own baseball team, and by 1866, a newspaper and an orphanage. It was also home to the aforementioned African Civilization Society, an early Black nationalist organization that originally supported emigration to Africa, but by 1866 promoted instead Black self-reliance and racial uplift among people staying in the US. The editors and contributors to the Freedmen's Torchlight, Reverend Rufus Perry, Reverend Amos Freeman, Reverend Henry Wilson, Junius Morrill, Martin Delaney, who aside from being quite remarkable men, I mean, every one of them, were also members of the African Civilization Society. They state clearly in the newspaper's first issue their firm commitment to Black self-elevation, asserting that they, quote, believe and always have believed that the Black man of education can best instruct, direct, and elevate his race. So what we have before us is a document produced by arguably the most prosperous free Black community in the United States at the time, and one largely united by a shared belief in Black self-reliance and self-elevation. If this weren't remarkable enough, the newspaper that I'm showing you, and that you'll get to see in person, is the only known surviving copy in existence. So let that sink in. This is the only copy of this newspaper. One exists, and it's here in Hartford. If it had not survived, we would have no knowledge of what this newspaper looked like, what beliefs united these men. We'd have to find that information elsewhere if we could. So you're probably wondering, as I once was, how and when did this get to Hartford? And who's the person responsible for its preservation? Before I have you help me reconstruct the solution, so this is going to be audience participation, folks. Let me just state the obvious. The person who collected and preserved Freedmen's Torchlight had no idea that they were preserving something so unique. No idea. They simply were going about the business of something that they loved, collecting material that was of interest to them. Let's return, though, to the document. So imagine yourself in my shoes. Before you is a document of obvious historic value and interest, but you have no idea how or when or by whom it came into the collection. So what do? Are there perhaps some clues on the document itself that might guide you in the right direction? So let's look at that first page again. Is there anything unusual, other than the things we've already mentioned, that stands out when we look at this page? Anything at all? We talked about the masthead, the alphabet. Watkinson did open in 1866, August 28th, 1866, 8 days after the official end of the Civil War. Yeah, pretty incredible. Top right there, right, a 30. Yes, exactly. That handwritten number 30 stood out to me too. And my initial working hypothesis was that it indicated that this was item number 30 in a collection of items that was at least 30 or more. So somehow it gets separated from these other items. What could these other items have been? I thought to myself, well, was it one of 30 or more miscellaneous newspapers? That would make sense. We have a lot of papers in our collection. They're all stored in flat file boxes that are just one or two issues of a particular paper from the period. It might have come in with them and then gotten separated. So I trundled off to look at all the newspapers, and try as I might, I did not find a 29 or a 28 or a 1 or a 2 up in the right-hand corner of any of the newspapers. So that was clearly not what they were with. Let's look at the document maybe for some other clues. So there's the 30. How about this page? Does anybody see anything at all in this image And I will give you a hint. This is a bit harder. The point I just made about our other newspapers all being stored flat is the key to this. Anybody see anything here? A crease. Yeah, very good. Crease, indicating that this was folded at one point. So it hadn't been stored in the way that our other newspapers had been stored. It had been folded at some point in its existence, and not folded in the typical way that you fold a newspaper that's printed in this way. Usually you print a newspaper that way and you fold it in the middle, right? And there are actually creases elsewhere. But this one runs vertically. So this was folded in or something like that to make it smaller across its width. Okay, how about any other clues? Anything weird or noticeable here? And here you can see one of those horizontal folds, right? What is that strange dark spot, along the right edge? Well, close examination reveals that that's actually glue residue from a point at which this was bound with some other items. So it's folded up because it has to be stored, it has to be bound in with some other things that are of smaller size. So now I'm looking for something smaller, something more like a book-sized thing. So I thought to myself, okay, it wasn't stored with newspapers, it's stored with something smaller. What could these other things be? What unites this and those other documents, do you think? Any guesses? Could be a scrapbook, that's a great guess. Yeah, I didn't even bother to check there, and we have a lot of scrapbooks, but that's a good guess. Yeah, could be there. It wasn't, but what about the content? Freedmen, right? Are there other things in the collection about free Black people or about the Civil War, this particular period? So I had this hypothesis that this was about the freedmen. And with that as my hypothesis, I searched our catalog for collections of documents related to them, found a couple of potential candidates, headed off into the stacks, and it didn't take me long. There on a shelf, surrounded by other books on slavery, abolition, the US Civil War, was a bound volume that was fairly bursting. I mean, it's this fat, it's huge. And I opened it up, and inside was a handmade table of contents written on line paper with the Freedmen's Torchlight listed as item number 30 of 31. And inside the front cover was a book plate that said that this was from the collection of Mrs. Mary Trumbull Prime, presented to the Watkinson Library in 1872. We have had this item in our collection for 151 years. The words on the book plate absolutely stunned me because I knew Mary Trumbull Prime to be the wife of a man named William Cowper Prime, who was the first vice president of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and a man who contributed to Watkinson Library some of its most valuable books. Incredibly valuable, beautiful books. Important, though, as all of his books are that he left us, he had been outdone by his wife, who had quite accidentally preserved a document that would prove to be utterly unique. Without it, we would have no real detailed knowledge of the efforts that a group of free Black people made in the days after the Civil War to educate others newly free. And although Friedman's Torchlight is, in my opinion, the most significant, it's not the only important thing that Mary Trumbull Prime left to us. She collected hundreds of items related to the Civil War, to slavery, to its abolition, all while the war was being fought and at a time when collecting political material of this sort was largely the province of men. Like the men who published the Friedman's Torchlight, she too was remarkable. Throughout this talk, you've heard me use a lot of names: Rufus Perry, Amos Freeman, Martin Delaney, Mary Trumbull Prime. But the most important name in all of this is yours. Without your interest and involvement in uncovering or recovering the names and activities of these people, what they cared about, what their struggles and achievements were, what the texture of their perhaps very ordinary lives was like, those lives, those struggles, those achievements would be lost. But you're important in another way as well, because each of you also has the chance to keep alive those who will come after us, the lives and activities of those around you. What form that might take is up to you. It could be photos of the folks who hang out in your neighborhood, along with the songs they play and dance to. It could be audio recordings of stories told by your aunt about what Hartford was like back in the day. It could be the journal that you keep and in which you record your own thoughts, hopes, fears, and joys. Thank you.
That's a tough act to follow. Thank you so much, Eric, for that. I'd like to now turn to the same period, the Civil War and Reconstruction, and look at Trinity College. As I was introduced, I'm Eric Stoykovich, the College Archivist and Manuscript Librarian at Trinity. And Trinity in the mid-19th century was then a very small liberal arts college. Located where the current state capitol building is, the college, known between 1825 and 1845 as Washington College, was housed in these three stone buildings. And so we have Trinity Hall here in the center, and we have Jarvis Hall and Brownell Hall. And Trinity's first campus was sat prominently on what was then called College Hill. These are the three main buildings. However, by the post-Civil War period, the college had decided to move, selling its hillside property to the state of Connecticut for it to build the state capitol, and so replace this illustrious building with a new and larger space. Trinity would move from its College Hill location to its new location along Summit Street by the late 1870s. The college was 50 years old then, having been founded in 1823. But before the old campus was sold, the buildings dismantled. You can't find much remnant up there except for a plaque. A number of photographers stopped by during the first half of the 1870s to capture scenes of Trinity College before it moved. One of those photographers was interested not only in taking photos of students, faculty, and staff as individuals with individual portraits, but also in snapping photos of groups of students. Here I'll circulate a couple of photos so you can get a better view. What do you notice about these two photos, which date from 1874? Someone said very formal. Hats. Absolutely. Anything else? Yes, it is the same building, indeed. That's a very good observation. They don't look very young for what we know to be students. Yes, all men. That is correct. There's a few faculty. This is the same year. It's partial, or let's say, I'll get into this a little bit. There's some students that were depicted and were not in the second photo and so forth. But it's a good observation on how complete. You've hit many of the points that I have on my sheet, so I won't belabor the point, but the top photograph has what appears to be 14 students, and the bottom photograph has 13 students and three other individuals. They all seem to be very casual, at which, you know, you did say formal, but for example, we have this. Yeah, we have this fellow just slouching over this pillar, and, you know, this guy's leaning on this older gentleman, which seems very casual to me. And these, let me go back one here. These folks have taken off their hats and are holding their hats on their feet. You know, we have books being used as props. So there's lots of, you know, things to say about this. There seems to be a general equality of dress. A lot of heavy woolen coats. Buildings were less insulated back then, and the heating system's far less generous. But what these close reading of these photographs is the sort of thing that we like to do at the Watkinson, have people sit and look, and it's the habit that we encourage our researchers to conduct close investigations with. And so when we look closely, we noticed that some of these men have switched places, and back to this image here. This fellow moves down here, and you can do all kinds of things. And we do have some information about who they were down to the names. But I don't know, for example, yet, which photo was taken first, whether it was on the same day or not. I do notice a little detail that the bulletin board seems to have different pieces of paper on it. You know, is that maybe the same day and somebody's changed out something? Maybe it's a different day. So there's things like that. You also want to investigate how the groups were positioned, either intentionally by the photographer or by their own choice, communicates different things about their level of familiarity with each other, perhaps. And so thank you for your responses and indulging me and looking closely at these photos. Now I'm going to spoil the suspense a little bit by letting you know more about the photos from what I've been able to glean. The photos are part of the Trinity College Archives, and I want to tell you a little bit more about the people in the photos. They're mostly members of the class of 1876, and that class had just 13 students. Fewer than the number of people in the first two rows here, or three rows. And the Trinity students of the class of 1876 came from a variety of states in reconstructed US. However, and this is interesting, none of the 19 to 21-year-olds in the class of 1876 were from the state of Connecticut. Not one. And this was not atypical for that time. They were all out-of-state students. 3 or 4 of them were from the South, 2 from Georgia, 1 from South Carolina, 1 from Maryland. And the students who had been attending Trinity from the South before the Civil War, and there were a great number of them, left because of the Civil War. But after the war, the college began to admit applicants again from the states of the Confederacy as early as the fall of 1866. So just the same dates as we learned about in our last presentation, that there's really a lot of interesting things happening. And one of those interesting things is all of these students, regardless of birth, had been born just before the war, 1855 to 1859, somewhere in there. And so that Trinity College brings people to Hartford from outside of Connecticut. This is a reality that is as true today as back then, perhaps more so today. We have in some classes recently up to 20% international students. And this is one of our sources of pride at Trinity. In addition, I'll move on to slide 4 here to talk about 3 individuals who stand out in the lower photo. On the left, and I'll circulate these images, group. One was Episcopal Bishop John Williams, who served as Bishop of Connecticut from 1865 till his death in 1899. At the same time, he was Chancellor of Trinity College and a lecturer in history. He was about 60 years old in this photograph, from what I can tell. The middle man is Reverend Samuel J. Andrews, instructor, not professor, but instructor of ethics and metaphysics. So he's lurking in the background here. We have John Williams here. And then the third man is James Williams, a man born enslaved in New York in the late 18th century, who escaped his enslavement and spent over 5 decades in Hartford as a paid staff employee of Trinity. He worked as an all-around handyman, janitor, and bell ringer. He was a member of the Prince Hall Masons Lodge here in Hartford, and a long-term congregant of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. But he was also apparently, as we have in the Watkinson, a number of his portraits. He was arguably, from what I can tell, one of the most photographed men in Hartford before the arrival of Mark Twain. We have a number of his portraits, one of which is this group portrait, outdoor portrait from the 1870s. And so they're standing before a chapel building, which is no longer standing, and he stands with a class of Trinity students whose names are much less remembered today than that of his own, in part because of the biography that was written about him. And I have over on the table the biography by a member of the Trinity class of 1873 who wrote a biography about him. So you can look and ponder on memory and so forth. The rest of the names, kind of disappeared. They didn't have biographies written in their own lifetime. There's something, I think, having a biography about you in your own lifetime. It's kind of a remarkable thing. So is really a important part of this. It's also, I think, important to have these photographic traces of Hartford as treasures that we invite people to explore at the Watkinson. And they help tell many of the stories of Trinity in Hartford and Trinity's relationship to Hartford. So thank you.
Back. Can you hear me okay? That's good? Okay. So Eric and Eric have done an amazing job of telling you about some of our more historical collections. Given that we are a Hartford-based collection and we were set up to be a library of reference for all. We have expanded our collecting methods to include things like oral histories. And just recently, we've started a post-custodial archiving project. And I'm going to explain to you what that is in a minute. It's no secret that traditional library and archival practices can often leave out certain groups of people. In addition, not all stories come in the form of published books that can be put on a shelf. We have to create a space for different types of research materials that are representative of our local communities. So one project that we're working on right now, and it was, I think, almost a year ago that we had the opening of it at the Park Street branch of the Hartford Public Library, is our, our Voices of Migration Oral History project. And I'm pleased to say that this project has also received 2 grants from the Andrew W. Mellon funded Council of Independent Colleges, Humanities for the Public Good. It's a very long title. And we've had a really wonderful experience working with them. So I'm going to show you that project right now and just talk briefly about some of the features of it, and then I'll talk a little bit about our new post-custodial archiving project. So this is the website that we've created. And we've set it up so that every person that we've interviewed, and I will say this is not all of it. We have a backlog right now because we've had a ton of participation in the project, and we have to index all the interviews and then get them up. But everybody gets a summary and kind of a little brief biography here. And then if you click on the image, well, it doesn't want to work, but that's okay. The way that it works is OHMS is an oral history metadata synchronizer, and what it allows us to do is to index the interviews instead of having to provide a transcription for them. And what that allows is that if you have, say, a 2-hour-long oral history interview, you can search it, and in this case, we've made it so that you can search it both in English and in Spanish. And so let's say Eugenio Caro is talking about education and his experience with education. You can search education, and then all of the instances where he discusses that will come up, and you can just play those segments. And so I come from a family of where English is not their first language. My mom is Brazilian, and they speak Portuguese. And I can tell you that if you were to do an interview with my grandmother or my great aunt, they mix English and Portuguese, and it's not, your perfect English, right? So if you produce a transcript of somebody who has English not as their first language, it can be a bit reductive. It reduces their manner of speaking to kind of a very black and white sort of transcript. So what is remarkable about this project that we've set up is that it not only preserves the stories and the context, but it also preserves unique modes of expression and lets people speak for themselves as they want to be heard and not maybe as we want them to be heard. So the project has been a great success, I think. Again, it's rooted here in Hartford, and we are expanding it a little bit to include members of the Lusophone, the Portuguese-speaking community as well. And so anyway, I'm not sure why the interview isn't working, but you can access it online and it will be there. The other project that I'm really proud to share with you is our post-custodial archiving project. We've partnered with the Lloyd Best Institute of the Caribbean in Trinidad and Tobago to digitize the Lloyd Best archive. And we're doing this in a unique way. We're doing this through what the University of Texas at Austin at the Benson Latin American Collection was where I worked prior to coming to Trinity. And we had won a couple Mellon funded grants to do post-custodial work in Latin America. And so for me to explain what that is, I have to talk a little bit about traditional archiving and library collection methods so that you can see where we are kind of turning the tables on that. Let's see. I'm skipping some because I know we're short on time. So the general practice to collect an archive is, let's say, the Lloyd Best Archive is in Trinidad and Tobago. In most cases, the institution that wished to acquire that archive would go there, say, hey, we'll give you, however much money, and we're going to take this archive back. We're going to put it in our archive, and we're going to process it for you. And our archivist is going to describe these materials, and we'll make it available to researchers. So what that does is it takes the collection outside of the community that created it, and then assigns meaning and value someone else, the expert archivist or the expert whoever is describing materials they didn't create. And in so doing, what ends up happening is that the people who created the collection are somewhat alienated from the very thing that they created. It also changes the meaning of that thing and then changes the meaning of history. So much of our history is absolutely inaccurate. Even though you see the original thing, it's described, it's in the archive, it might not be what it was meant to be outside of that community, and it's not actually what it was meant to be. So what post-custodial archiving does is it departs from this traditional theory and practice of acquisition based on physical custody of records. And it recognizes that information is not always contingent on its original physical form. So to implement this idea, the archive partners with an organization who's creating or collecting archival materials, but maybe lacks the resources or technical expertise to ensure the preservation of and access to their materials. So then within the partnership, the organization is able to maintain both physical and intellectual control of the materials. So our project here at the Lloyd Best Institute, all of the materials are staying there in Trinidad and Tobago. We have brought digitization equipment down to them, and we are super lucky. We have Lloyd Best's daughter, Carmel Best, and a family friend, Saria Mohammed, who are doing the digitization and the metadata collection. The metadata collection is the description. So the collection is staying where it can continue to be a force for social change, and they maintain that physical control over the records, but they also maintain intellectual control over the records because they're assigning the meaning and value and description to it. We have been very fortunate. The Modern Endangered Archives program at UCLA has awarded us a grant to continue to do this work. And as you can see here, we just launched this project. So this is hot off the press here. So we just have a few items up, but we have made it so that our partners have access to the back end of this JSTOR platform. And so they can set the fields even, right? Because metadata includes things like, title, dates, year, what it is. And so we've learned a lot from this. We are starting with the digitization of the Trinidad and Tobago review. And we were trying to put all of the issues in order. And some of them didn't have dates, and they were labeled guava season. And so we were looking up, the other archivist, Amanda Matava, who's working with me, when is guava season? Oh, guava season. It looks like maybe it's from November to April. So we took it back and we said, well, we found these, we were all working together in the room. We found these that say guava season and found out it's November to April. Do you know what year, this could be? And they started laughing and they said, guava season means hard times. This could have happened any time, not in November to April, not. And so, had it been not a post-custodial project where we had brought this here and we had taken our best guess to describe something that we really knew nothing about, that's probably what would have gone into the official record. This was during guava season, during such and such, and it would have been totally wrong because it's an expression of, this is hard times. And we also learned, they wanted to have a field for culture. And the general culture, fields that were in there had terms like Trinidadian, West Indian. And while those were fine, they said, no, but we have to have Trinbagonian. And we have to have, and there's all these different terms that they added that really educated us about how the people there want to be referred to. We've learned so much from working with these partners, and it's been an absolutely amazing experience. And this is also a remarkable archive. In my work with Latin American and Caribbean archives, this is perhaps one of the most extensive, comprehensive archives that has, it has his speeches, it has his reports, it has all of his publications, it has the newspapers and magazines that he published. It has all of the pamphlets. He started a political party in Trinidad and Tobago, the Tapia House, and all of that. And generally, a lot of the collections in the Caribbean are somewhat, you get a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a bit fragmented. So this is a really comprehensive look into not just Trinbagonian culture, history, and politics, but Lloyd Best was passionate about the liberation of the Caribbean imagination. So not just Trinidad and Tobago, but the entire Caribbean. And so we're hopeful that with this work, his vision for the Caribbean, somebody else can take it up and make his vision a reality. Another reason that we thought this would be a great project is that we have a large West Indian community here in Hartford. And so I'm going to give now a kind of a shameless plug, but we're having an event, a bicentennial day on November 14th. It will start at 8 in the morning with a coffee hour. There's a keynote at 9. And all through the day, we're going to have panels and workshops. And one panel that Fiona is actually going to speak on is about this Lloyd Best digitization. And Carmel Best and Saria Mohammed will be there. You can meet them. You can learn more about that project. And my hope is that, in working with them, it's become clear that digitizing the Lloyd Best archive will be a start for the Lloyd Best Institute to become kind of a center or a site for the preservation of Caribbean cultural heritage. So we're very excited about that, and I feel like we're taking up, we're exploring and initiating new ways of building collections that are representative and inclusive of the Hartford community, so that we can continue David Watkinson's idea that we are a library of reference for the Hartford community, but also beyond, right? The local is global. And so this is our work now. Okay, I think. Oh, this is, just some scenes from our trip. This is Carmel Best, Lloyd's daughter, and Saria Mohammed, and this is our digital archivist, Amanda Matava. And these are some of the newspapers that we are starting to digitize. So we chose this, theme or whatever for this PowerPoint because we thought, oh, it looks, historical, it looks like this. But I like that it has the globe because the Watkinson is, was created to be a collection, to be used by Hartford, but it really is a world-class collection and has a global reach. And I think the work that we're doing right now is increasing that as well. So thank you all so much for your time. We can take questions.
Take questions. I'll come around with the mic and I'm going to be holding it. So go ahead and speak into it.
Did you mention how many pages the torchlight was, or was it just the one page? Sure.
Oh, yeah, the torchlight. Yeah, is this mic still on? Yeah, good. So the torchlight is 4 pages. So it was a single sheet, printed, folded in half to create 4 pages. And as far as I know, it's hard to know whether other issues were printed. This is volume 1, issue 1. They certainly intended to print more issues. Whether that happened or not, I don't know. Of course, nothing survived except this one copy of volume 1, issue 1. So,
Another question here.
So on the paper, stay up there, Eric.
oh, sorry.
On the paper, what did you do with it? It obviously was separated from the original
Yeah.
book or scrapbook. What did you do with it? How are you now preserving it? It says that in the index that it's 30 of 31. How are you going to keep it connected to Mary's scrapbook?
Yeah, so now obviously because of its value and interest in it, and also the fact that we would like to exhibit it in different ways, it will remain physically separate, but intellectually I've connected it within the records so that it's known that it now came from Mary Trumbull Prime. It was part of this original collection of documents all related to the Freeman. So intellectually that connection is there, but physically they're separated. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, a lot of documents have this happen to them where they get extracted and put in flat storage because it's better for the document. And that's what seems to have happened in this case. So everyone will now know who follows me, because we've made the intellectual connection between the documents that this is the association. Yeah.
Question in the back.
Yes, I've always wondered, and I don't know why I've never asked a librarian before, but what makes a book rare? What are the qualifiers that make a book rare?
Me again, huh? Okay. So what makes a book rare? I mean, a number of different things. Survival is often key. Off that, along with perhaps an initial limited print run. Newspapers certainly are not usually rare documents at all. They're printed in massive quantities. They become rare because, of course, they're printed on poor quality paper generally, and they're not. People don't tend to keep them. I mean, we don't keep our newspapers generally. We recycle them, and people in the day did the same thing. They turned that paper back into paper that could be used again. Survivability is one of the key things for the rarity of print books. Yeah.
Question here.
Oh, sorry, we keep you up there.
Yeah.
I was wondering if has there been a painstaking search for anything that Perry or Delaney or the rest of the African Civilization Society members would have written about their thoughts about this, the Torchlight, and any other copies that might be in their collections or their papers somewhere else?
So I'm glad that you asked that question.
in Brooklyn, there is a Weeksville Heritage Society in that same section of the city. Still exists. That photo that I showed you, if I can go back, see if I can do this. Not sure I'm adept enough to go back. So there are some historical houses there in Weeksville, in that Crown Heights section of Brooklyn, called the Hunterfly Road houses. That's the principal treasure of the Weeksville Heritage Center are those historic properties that were discovered in the 60s by aerial photography. I mean, people had forgotten that these homes existed. Brooklyn had gotten so developed. And the Weeksville Heritage Society was formed. They are an active organization. They're part of the same cultural heritage institutions as the Met itself. And their director came up and actually saw the document, and we've struck up a relationship. And even before that, they had digital copies of everything that we had. So I don't know what documents they've uncovered archivally belonging to Perry and the others. I mean, these were all really illustrious guys, really remarkable. There's an 1887 biography that include two of the members of the that were editors of the paper. Rufus Perry and Martin Delaney are in that 1887 biography. I can give you the title afterward if you're interested. It's online. It's digitized. It's 1,100 pages.
Question for Eric Stoykovich. The pictures of Washington University that you showed us. First of all, I'm interested in knowing, and this may be something that most of the people in the room know, but I don't know why. I'm assuming it was named after George Washington, and why did it no longer carry that name, and did that happen when it moved? The other question is, were those buildings, I think, sound familiar to me. I think some of them are still halls there. Are they did they transport the buildings and the materials, or how did that happen?
So chartered as Washington College, 1823, from the state of Connecticut. Over time, there were a number of Washington colleges that appeared in the country, and there was a decision in the 1840s, 1845, that a new name would be given. And so the Board of Trustees decided to change the name to Trinity College, reflecting the Episcopal roots of the founders, although the college was and still remains a non-sectarian, no religious test for application institution. So I think it's rather ironic, because we know many colleges and universities with the name Trinity. So it's like they thought, oh, well, we'll make this less confusing. Well, pick a more, unique name. Well, it didn't turn out that way. The name is still confused. I get emails from people seeking the Book of Kells, and you have to disabuse them of this desire to find the Book of Kells in Hartford. So, on the second question, the buildings were dismantled, and very little of it actually seems to have been transported to the new college. I think it's worth further investigation on that. We're still working through a backlog of the college archives materials, and so there might be some further examination of that. But there are photographs. There's rather interesting photographs where you see half a building, they're capturing it as it's being dismantled. I suspect the stone was reused in some fashion. You just don't get rid of nice stone like this. And so there's probably some reuse. The only things we have that we can actually hold from the original campus are some doorknobs and some canes that we think were made from the stair rails. There's a story and a couple documents that point to the stair rails being made into canes and given ceremonially. There was a little bit of treasure hunting. People, once they learned that these were going to be dismantled, did what people do.
Of the old campus, yeah.
Yes.
So I see Bill has a question. Does anybody else have a question, or will this be the last? We have a question too, so.
I'm curious about the Lloyd Best connection, and I'm wondering, how did you find them? And was there a Hartford connection that led you to them or them to you?
Yeah, so I guess through Trinity is the short answer to that. Trinity had a program called Trinity in Trinidad, and Lloyd Best was involved in educating Trinity students. And Lloyd Best actually spoke at Trinity several times. And his wife, Suniti Maharaj Best, was a journalist. And she also worked with the Trinity in Trinidad program. But your question is a good one, related to one of the features of post-custodial archiving as well, is that it's generally, whereas most archival collections are sought for their value, and usually it's a monetary value. So for example, when I was at the University of Texas, the Harry Ransom Center was able to acquire the Gabriel Garcia Marquez papers because they could pay the most money. And they went and they took them and they brought them to UT and they're at the Ransom Center. And, it's a wonderful resource and, whatever. But it's generally, it's sought after and the highest bidder gets the archive. The way that post-custodial archiving works is more based on personal relationships. And the very first time that I went to Trinidad and Tobago, Suniti was one of the very first people that I met there. And she showed me the archive. And I said, I've done this work before where we digitize the archive here, and I don't know if you'd be interested in that. And then she brought her daughter in and they decided that they wanted to do this. Shortly thereafter was COVID, so we couldn't move on anything. And then after COVID, I started looking into some grants and, seeing if Trinity would support some of this work. And we've been really, really lucky to get to do this. But it's based on personal relationships and not on the transactional relationship that treats the archive as an object to be acquired. It's more of the archive as a force for social change, and not in terms, it doesn't always go to the highest bidder or to, this person got it and they have it, and it's beyond possession, right? It's a totally different approach to collecting that incorporates deep personal relationships, because there has to be a trust there, in terms of copyright, in terms of, they hold the copyright, it's up on our website, but they maintain the copyright. So if anybody wants to reproduce any of that, they have to get permission from the Lloyd Best Institute. It's there to be a research tool for people to learn about, whatever they want to learn about in the archive. But yeah, that's a really, really interesting question that gets to, I think, to me, it's one of the most important features of this mode of collecting, is that it's based on personal relationships and trust. And we knew them. So we, always in archives and special collections work, you stand on the shoulders of giants, and Trinity had already formed these relationships, so they trusted us.
Yeah, for wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for all of the things of national and even global significance at Watkinson. There's also a ton of local stuff. And one question is, how do you get students to engage with that stuff? And it would seem to me, and I don't know, even 100th what you all do about Watkinson, but what I do know is that you could probably keep students doing seminar papers busy for 100 years and you wouldn't run out of content. And so how do you get them to start?
Well, I think Eric Johnson-DeBaufre referred to that at the end of his talk when he said, you know, the significance and the way that these materials are taken up is kind of up to you. To get the people in to use them, I mean, some is just general interest. And yes, we have the Hartford Studies Project. We have a lot of Hartford collections and now our oral history project and many things. A lot of ways that we get students in is through classes, both at Trinity and at other local and sometimes even a little further out than Hartford, coming to look at our collections. We do a lot of outreach work. We host events. We have talks and workshops. We have a lot of digital exhibits that we've put together. So all of these things are to draw people in to use the collections. But maybe you guys.
I mean, Bill, you ask a really important question and one that we think about all the time. And, I think one of the key challenges is that students sometimes have a kind of apprehension. They don't think that maybe they belong in a special collections or archives or something. They're a little fearful about what it means to work with these things. And that's why we try to have some kind of low-key events like we're going to have a event called Watkinson Witching Hour on the 31st, where we'll bring out a bunch of witchcraft-related things, and Eric will bring out some spooky stuff from college history. And that's an opportunity where, in a very low-key way, a student who might not think they belong there can actually put their hands on, and they will, because I will force them to, a book that's 500 years old, and make them understand that, this stuff is stuff that you can use. If you don't use it, it's just stuff on our shelves. It just sits on a shelf. What's its value? So I think part of it is trying to overcome that. And we try to do that with a variety of sort of low-key events, and then try to get people interested in doing deeper research as well. So,
and I think another piece to this is working with the Trinity faculty. And so one of whom is in the audience tonight, and working with them to develop classes and so forth. And one of our new initiatives is a institute, that's a pretty formal word for just saying a workshop that we're going to offer to folks in the New England, New York area, and bring them in January and in May, 2 workshops to kind of discuss pedagogical tools, principles, and practices that we think elevate faculty's ability to interact with difficult material. Material that's handwritten is today obscure for a lot of people of a younger generation. And so working with faculty to give them the confidence to work with such materials is really what we hope this institute accomplishes.
Thank you for that fascinating presentation. Join me, please, in thanking our speakers tonight. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. And many of you have been to lots of our lectures before, and we really appreciate your attendance. People online as well, streaming and watching this later. I want to remind you that next week we've got 2 more lectures in our Hartford History Lecture Series. Next week, we continue not only our theme on archives, but also our double name theme. We had two Erics tonight. Next week, we have two Andreas who are coming, Andrea Rapaz and Andrea Slater from the Connecticut Museum of Culture and History, formerly known as the Connecticut Historical Society. They'll be talking about their archives. And then the week after that, at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, not here at the Old State House, we're going to be hearing our final lecture of the series from Bill Hosley, talking about the first 100 years of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. So we hope you'll join us. Thank you. I believe, too, you have some items to show us. And
I don't know. If you all want to come over here and see the free